Autocratic oligarchy and police state takes form. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe and let's talk about this. So, we are in the very beginning stages of the building of the autocratic oligarchy that is Donald Trump's second term in office. I call it his reign, and I did so before he got elected. Oh, no, right after he got elected, and then we have him call himself a king. So, that sort of came full circle. Now, we are in the very preliminary stages of the autocracy coming out. And that, how do you know that's happening? You know that by the fact that the executive is consolidating all his power to the unitary executive, who is now Donald Trump. And by cutting the different stages or by making huge cuts to the different departments, he is cutting out so many people who process so many claims that he is neglecting the American people. But what he's doing by sort of doing away with US aid, for example, is that he's getting that power back of how he's going to use foreign aid. And he's doing all of this that he's doing with the Federal Aviation Authority, with the Treasury Department, with the Defense Department, with every single thing that the Consumer Protection Bureau, every single thing that you can think of, he is trying to erase those protections and safety nets that have been congressionally mandated by statute, by law, and signed by presidents. And the biggest betrayal at this point is that Congress is not asserting its power. It is not going to court saying, the president doesn't have a right to stop funds appropriated by Congress. President doesn't have the power to stop enforcement of legislation that has been passed and turned into law. So Congress is relenting its power, and I did an episode before talking about how Congress relented its duty, Senate, its advice and consent duty by allowing the nomination of Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, and Bobby Jr. These nominations went through Congress. Pete Hegseth didn't have that much defense experience. He was part of the military. But there were a lot of questions about his ability to steer the Department of Defense. Instead, what has he done? He has announced multi-billion dollar cuts to the Defense Department for the next 5 years, every year, successively. What he has done is gone out and essentially capitulated the American position on Ukraine in Russia's favor by saying that, it's a non-starter for, Ukraine to expect to get into NATO, and it's a non-starter for them to think that they're going to get their territories back that have been, invaded and annexed by Russia. So essentially, that's Pete Hegseth. And it's only been just over a month, Then you have Tulsi Gabbard, who is a favorite of Russian media, who is a friend of Bashar al-Assad, who was a former dictator of Syria, now lives in Moscow. And, Russia and Putin couldn't be happier with all of this happening, but especially with the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard. Then you have Kash Patel, who's a conspiracy theorist and a propagandist who stood by Donald Trump's election lies and January 6th big lie, who then wrote a children's book about King Donald and the wizard who was Kash Patel. And it was something about Hillary Clinton or something. And that person is now the head of the FBI. He had some prosecutorial experience, some litigation experience. He's never been part of the FBI. But Senate just laid down its power. You know, shame on Senate Majority Leader John Thune, to have done so. We just needed a few votes of sanity. And, you know, votes by Lisa Murkowski and Mitch McConnell, they're great. But it is the Senate Majority Leader's job to say we're going to push through or not these candidates who have been nominated. And Thune could have stopped their nominations right away. He could have if he put his weight, he would bring at least 10 to 15 senators with him. But he chose not to do that. And that by doing that, he may have been party first, loyal to Donald, loyal to MAGA, but he did not put country first. He did not put the Senate duty of the Senate Majority Leader to make sure that they properly function the advice and consent power that the Constitution puts on the Senate. And then, just in the dead of night, not very long ago, a few hours ago, we learned that Donald Trump has appointed Dan Bongino, the podcaster, as the deputy FBI director, who doesn't require Senate confirmation, who is essentially the highest ranking non-Senate confirmed person who oversees the FBI, to this person who was part of the Secret Service at some point. Before that, he was an NYPD cop. But for a better part of the last 10 years or more, he has been a propagandist and a conspiracy theorist who spread election lies about the 2020 election and was a big part in riling up people and with the big lie. And that person gets the second in command role of the FBI, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. That is, it's a problem, because they're going to gut rehab the FBI and fill them with loyalists and then go after people who Donald Trump perceives to be his enemies and who themselves have their own enemies list like Kash Patel has. I bet that Dan Bongino has them too. And that would make small and big podcasters and influencers and everything think twice about, speaking out about Dan Bongino and his, previously good career that morphed into some sort of podcast monster who, put his own interest and the popularity of the Donald Trump brand above the country, and by doing that has been rewarded this position. And then we have the attacks coming from the government, from Donald Trump, from Doji, from Elon Musk, saying that don't go ahead and investigate AOC for her educating her constituents on their constitutional rights. We're seeing this chaos brewing as cabinet positions come into play, and they are saying, say no to Elon Musk's orders of replying to the emails saying, what have you done in the last 5 days? So we're seeing this sort of tension building in our executive branch, within the branch, between the powers that are struggling to sort of squabble over presidential powers because Donald Trump thrives in this chaos and he's letting it happen. This chaos will engulf any proper execution of any government function, of any of the executive functions, thereby nullifying the purpose of Congress legislating and creating those departments for those purposes, whether that be anything from the NIH to the CDC to the HHS, which is now RFK Jr.'s department, who is an anti-vaccine person, who has this Health and Human Services Department that oversees the CDC and the FDA, and the water we drink and the food we eat and the medicine we have to take. And that person doesn't believe in vaccines. Does he even know that there's a measles outbreak in Texas right now? Does he know that there's a potential of that becoming a multi-state one? Because the CDC website talks about the outbreak happening in more than one place, just not as big as the one happening in Texas. I mean, they've kept that information up so far. I don't know how long that's going to stay up. And I talked about Tulsi Gabbard. So those four, and then Dan Bongino, and then you see that there's already calls for investigation, the criminal investigations into members of Congress. And forget about independent journalists and all of that. They're definitely going to start coming after people who speak badly of them, and it gets to them. I mean, I think that independent journalism and engaged citizenry is a necessity at this time. And we are all under threat, no matter how big or small. Even regular people, if they say or do the wrong thing in the wrong place, to the wrong people, can end up being targeted by the federal government. Because that is what Donald Trump and the Republican Congress has wished for this executive to be, the unitary executive. But then there's the outside extra-governmental domestic terrorism element to it as well. You have the chaos, and then there's this conservative but moderate principles first sort of forum happening in Washington, D.C., where Officers Dunn, Fanone, and I believe Hodges, as well as Sergeant Gonell, were going to talk. And they were confronted by Enrique Tarrio talking about how they had smiles on their face when he got 22 years, but now they can't look at him in the face. And then Officer Fanone turns around, looks at him in the face and says, "You are a traitor to the country." And then the fact that that harassment is happening right now, and it has only been like 34 days that Donald Trump has been in power and pardoned Enrique Tarrio, and he has the gall to go and start creating that sort of a chaos when he wasn't invited to it. He was yelling and shouting outside like the Proud Boys that have now been emboldened by Donald Trump's pardon. Remember, Enrique Tarrio is a pardoned felon who was pardoned for seditious conspiracy and sentenced to prison for 22 years, and then pardoned blanketedly by Donald Trump. So we have the beginnings of setting up the people who are going to go after their opponents within government and within large media and within independent media of a certain size through governmental suppression, governmental means, by audits or targeting investigations by way of Patel and Bongino. it'll range from that to the extra-governmental domestic terrorism alert that's happening around the country. And, this principal first forum where they spoke, where conservatives spoke as well, there was a bomb threat on that forum. You don't hear about bomb threats on CPAC because the left, whatever you want to say, divisive or disarray, we are in right now. We don't believe in violence. We don't believe. We don't just go to. We don't go to CPAC. We're not like Enrique Tarrio and the Proud Boys and Stuart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers who go and pick fights in our forums and stand and protest at our forums when we couldn't give a shit about theirs. But they do their jobs of intimidating, of terrorizing, of going, within the bounds of the First Amendment, but just enough to not be incitement of violence. Like toe that line of incitement of violence where you can be held liable for saying what you're saying. So we have to remain vigilant. We have to make sure that we know what's coming. There's a police state coming. Does that mean that we have to be afraid? No. Does that mean that we have to stop talking about it? No. At least I won't be. And I'm sure there are many, many, many others who won't. There'll be some who do. But if you want our republic to survive, now is the time to speak up instead of quiet away and hope that somebody else does the speaking for you. So with that said, thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care of yourselves.